everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Devy Workshop with me, Jordan. As you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, we've got a special guest, and we'll jump. Shall we get into the episode? We'll jump straight in and introduce him. It's Kevin Coleman. You know, he's the first recipient of the first annual Tag Rising Star Award, which is amazing. He's part of the podcast trio from the Devy Royale, where you've seen him, and also writes for the Football Guys. Does a lot of Devy, does a lot of Dynasty. So if you don't follow him, make sure you drop him a follow on Twitter at theboys_22. Find all his work on there. You know, like I say, the Devy Royale, which they've got a Twitter handle as well, at the Devy Royale. Follow that. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. So yeah, like I say, I'll drop all them below and stuff so you can follow him. There's a lot of information to take in there and stuff. But yeah, definitely follow Kevin. Kevin, thank you for jumping on this episode. To talk about some. I'll try to find a fancy name for it, to be honest with Kevin, but Devy Advice is the best thing I could go with.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on. Yeah, getting into Devy, and if you're not into Devy, you don't know what the hell Devy is. I'm here to help you with that. And just kind of give you guys like a little bit of a background of what the format is, why it can be fun, and just maybe you try a league. That's the goal. Try one league.
Yeah, definitely you should jump into it. The leagues, there's like a few places you can get into them. Before I thought with this episode, I tried to maybe look at some like advice in different areas like evaluation, drafting, because I know I think about a month or two ago you dropped an episode on the Devy Royale where it was I think it was just called "What is Devy," and that was like the basics of getting into Devy, which is 15 minutes or something like that, which is a great video to really introduce you to Devy. So definitely go back and watch that and subscribe to their channel, So I thought I'd try and evaluate more on that, with the drafting and evaluating if you've already been in a league for a little bit. So, but first and foremost, like the intro, how did you get into Devy, Kevin, and what makes it enjoyable for yourself?
Yeah, it happened a while ago. I'm getting older now, so 8 or 9 years ago, to be honest. And I wasn't in I haven't ever really been in the community as far as heavy in it. I just got in 3 years ago. My buddy that I was friends with in college, he was in a Devy league, and so we always played fantasy, but I just played redrafts and all that stuff. And then they had an orphan, and they said, "Hey." And first and foremost, I love college football. College football is my true, I love college football, and I just loved it. And we've been really good friends, but college football friends for a long time. And he's like, "Hey man, I have this Devy opening." And I said, "What the hell is Devy?" I was like, what is going on here? I thought he was inviting me to some weird club or something. And he's like, no, it's a fantasy league where you draft college players. And I said, oh, and from a college perspective, I loved college. And I was like, that sounds interesting. So I hopped in. And it was a lot of fun, and it was kind of, and it's so crazy because 8 years ago, what we were doing in that format is so much different now, just in fantasy too, it just changes. And just thinking about it, it makes me laugh. But then I just started there, and I just played leagues and, commissioned some and kind of did it. And when I first decided to kind of get into it, as far as content wise, my goal has always been just explain it and go from there. And I know Scott Fish, the patriarch of fantasy Twitter and community, and does all something. He created it, really. He's the inventor of it. And so I always think of it back then, okay, what would Scott do? How does Scott want to perceive this, and go from there. And to me, the format itself, why it's enjoyable, part of it's because I love college football, but I think it also adds, I think as fantasy managers, and if you play Dynasty, it adds another wrinkle of kind of game theory and how you're going to kind of build a team or use assets and trades. And I think it just adds that other wrinkle. If you're kind of a degenerate, but not a super degenerate, you don't want to play college fantasy, I think that could definitely, it's fun, right? It adds that kind of skill-based, and it's a little bit more skill-based, and you can have some fun there. So, that's why I do it, but I got into it just because my buddy said, "Hey, you want to take over this orphan?" And I said, "Sure," and it's taken me down a weird path of, now I create content for it, and I'm in leagues for it, and I commission leagues for it, and those type of things. But that's usually how we always get started. Our buddies get us involved in something stupid, and then we just roll with it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's great if you try new things. It opens up doors that a lot of the times that you don't expect. And I think a thing that you touched on there was a bit similar to me, where I was a big NFL fan and I got into college football. And if you get into the college football for the first time, it kind of blows you away how many teams there are, how big actual college football is. With all the conferences, it can really, really blow you away from it, maybe put you off it. But with the Devy, I think, like you say, if you get into a league, you can have. We'll get into obviously the drafting side of it as well. But if you're drafting Devy players, you don't have to jump into college and like watch everything. You can focus on your players, from the college side and stuff, to get when, watching college. If you've got, say, Marvin Harrison, you can go and watch just Ohio State games and stuff. You don't have to like take in all of the college football. For me personally, I love college football, so I watch it all, and hopefully just them little steps can make people love all of it as well and stuff. But yeah, that's a bit similar to how I got into it. I just liked college football, and I thought, what the fantasy side of just college fantasy football was a bit too much for me, because I didn't really know much about the group of five and things like that. I was like,
Yeah.
didn't know many of these players and stuff, so I started just playing Devy and stuff, and I really enjoyed it. It's like I say, you mentioned at the top, just definitely just try a league. There's loads of free ones out there. You don't have to play for money and stuff, but there's loads of free ones out there. And like, definitely go watch your episode that you dropped on the Devy Royale that really gets you introduced. It really dives into like how you where you play it, and the things you can do as commissioners as well, which was a great episode. So, like I said at the top of the episode, we were going to try and evaluate on Devy instead of just like looking at the basics of like, oh, what is Devy? Because like I say, you've obviously dropped an episode, and there's a few of us out there that like explain that. We'll like try to look at maybe some tactics. I mentioned in the chat that I didn't want to give too many secrets, but Kevin's kindly said I don't mind giving secrets away if it helps people.
Nope.
Players. But I've tried to put it into segments, and the first one is obviously drafting. And the first part of a Devy draft is not your dynasty side. Obviously you can there's different ways to draft. There's obviously the typical dynasty where you split into vets and then a rookie draft. Some people combine them both, where it's vets and rookies together in one draft before the Devy. Is there anything different you do, Kevin, when you're drafting? In the dynasty startup side of it before the Devy? Like, I mean, when I first started, I used to think, oh, right, I need to get mostly young players in here and stuff, and then like maybe stay away from the vets, and like when my Devy players come in, like I can decide, like, and have all these young players. But at the same time, you probably like. Then I learned that having vets isn't a bad thing as well. Do you still draft the same as you do in a dynasty league?
Yeah. So as far as like your dynasty area, like how you build, I build it however I usually build a dynasty team. So like I'm in a dynasty league now, and it's not Devy related because it's kind of like it's a league with like 11 guys I really like on social media. And that's how I would build a Devy squad, because the way I do this, and I think when you get into Devy, the number one mistake people do, and it's kind of like how you kind of mentioned, like, oh, I got to get the young guys, and then I'm going to have these Devy assets come up on my team. There is such a miss rate with Devys and Devy players and assets. Like, you just miss on guys. Keyshawn Boutte, Zach Evans from this year, just to give you an example. Those guys were first round picks the last couple of years in Devy. And if you bank on those Devy assets being like your guys on your NFL squad, that's when you get a lot of orphans, and you got a lot of guys that get upset because, oh, I was going to plug in Boutte, who's supposed to be a first round pick, and now my wide receiver room is aging. So the way I look at it, you do your dynasty draft like you would build however you'd want to do it. So, if you want to go zero running back and you build through the wide receiver position, which is like all the rage right now, you go do that. You do that. If you want to go bully running back and just draft like 6 running backs this offseason, which the value is going to be, and you do that. The way I look at the Devy side, so you just do dynasty however you want. The only thing I would say is I do make sure in Devy, and dynasty the same way, I sure up my quarterback room. So if I can get 2 guys in the top 13, that's my goal. Like, if I can go trade up and do that stuff, I will do that, because quarterbacks in Devy, especially just in Superflex, but in Devy especially, they dry up very fast and they get expensive. And so this is the cheapest you're going to get quarterbacks is in your startup. But then from the Devy perspective, I just draft best player available, and those are my assets. So like the way I do it is a little different than some. Some will trade like 75 startup picks to get as many Devy picks as they can and build through the Devy side, and that's what they do, which isn't a terrible strategy if you hit on all those guys. But the way I look at it is you draft your dynasty team, and then I'm going to take the assets that people really want. And it's not because I know I can trade them. And in reality, in a lot of my Devy's teams, I don't really keep a lot of my Devy assets. I trade them all, and I trade them for NFL production, and I go win leagues. So, for example, I put out a poll recently about Marvin Harrison Jr. Who would you rather have? So if you don't know who Marvin Harrison Jr. is, you will soon, but he's Ohio State wide receiver. He's probably the top wide receiver prospect we've had since Jamar Chase. And I put up there, who would you rather have, him or Jalen Waddle, or him or, the top guy, CeeDee Lamb? And Marvin Harrison Jr. won those polls. Now, I don't disagree maybe with those, but again, Waddle and CD just put up elite production wide receiver one seasons. You realistically, based on those polls, could get like Waddle plus something for Marvin Harrison Jr. And, there's no guarantee Marvin, we think so, but there's no guarantee Marvin's going to be a top 5 guy as soon as he gets into the league. And so I think that's the way I look at it, like, especially in startups and how I draft. I look for those Devy assets that I know people are going to value really high. And then I just use them to try to win leagues, because that's why we're here. We're trying to win our leagues and everything there. And there's always going to be Devy assets you can pick up. There's always the guys that fall through the crack, like Javonte Williams. I was in a 10-round startup the year Javonte was a junior, and he didn't get drafted. So he was still in the rookie draft after that. Like, there's always guys that fall through. So there's still value to be had in those areas. But yeah, keep it simple. Draft dynasty just the way you do. Don't overvalue young talent. Just go get your team, and then you use your Devy assets for like trade bait.
Yeah, it's a good point that you made there. Because I remember when I first started Devin, obviously I was like a bit of a rookie. I was like, I only played fantasy for 3 or 4 years before there and stuff. So like, I remember where I thought, I know, I will, I'll trade, I'll go quarterback late. I think I picked up Stafford, and I can't remember the other one, thinking these are okay quarterbacks that they could win me a league with the whatever I've got there.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got Spencer Rattler and DJ Ukulele, and I'm going to be okay in the future, because these two are going to come through. And these two are very aging quarterbacks. I've got these two young guys, and we know what happened if you follow college football. You know what happened with Spencer Rattler and DJ Ukulele. So, it's also good that you can like learn from these mistakes, because obviously we're all not perfect. I remember you put a post out, I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, saying that we all like to be right, and it's it's also you're never going to be right all the time. It's learning from your mistakes, like, and listening to other people, content creators. You mentioned that all content creators can't be right all the time, but it's like learning, and that's one way to learn, is by getting things wrong sometimes, which I did. But yeah, it's great advice there. But one thing that as well, like a lot of people play Dynasty always have tiers and positional rankings. Would you say it's just as important just to have them in the Devy side? If like, obviously I know people play casual, but if you're really into it, it's still important to have them for Devy side, would you say?
Oh yeah. You're gonna need to have tiers. You have positional rankings. I think the one thing that I'm super proud of that we created at the Devy Royale for the Patreon that we have consensus rankings, but combined with Devy and Dynasty. So like, we've tried, now this is super hard, and we've already been like subtweeted and talked about based on the rankings, and that just comes with the territory. But for example, if you're listening out there, like, so I basically quarterback. So we have every position ranked. And what we did was we said, okay, we want to put in, where the hell does Caleb Williams fit within the tiers of like dynasty quarterbacks? So, their value. So like, Caleb Williams is my 9th rated dynasty quarterback right now. So when you go in there, we have this whole updated list of all of our quarterbacks. So he's right behind Lamar Jackson, in front of Kyler Murray for me. And then we have our rankings as well. And so like, you should have tiers. I think in Devy, it's also important to understand the value of these guys based on dynasty assets and where they rank. Because, if you play dynasty, values change so much and they change so fast. So for example, like the running back position, like we have Travion as a running back 10 overall in dynasty. Now that might be too high for some, but there are people in your league that might value him as like a top 12 guy. And we've seen Gibbs and Bijan, all these guys kind of come out that are already top 5 guys in that position. So having the tiers helps. I think if you're going to do this and you're going to play in competitive leagues and you're going to play there, even if you don't use our rankings, you should have some type of value ranking system that values them to the dynasty assets. Because that's the hardest part about Devy, is like, if I send you a trade for a Devy asset with an NFL guy combined, that's a hard area there. And even if you don't want to, go pay for content on our YouTube channel, I did that. Now I need to redo them. I'm going to do an updated list. I did actually Devy tiers this year, where I put these guys within like who you could trade them for and their value, to help people kind of do that. Cause that's the one area that a lot of novice Devy people get nervous about is trading their Devy assets for NFL guys and where those tiers are and position tiers and stuff like that. So absolutely have those tiers, know where they're at. When I do Devy drafts, one thing I like to do, or especially if it's combined drafts, so you'll see that a lot where they do Devy and Dynasty combined, having those tier breaks and knowing where those assets are ranked, it helps you understand like, oh, I should draft Henderson here, or Marvin Harrison Jr. is here. I need to make sure I get him in this tier of where those wide receivers are. So yeah, I think that's really important on both sides. And it just adds, this is why the format can be a little tough though, because it really adds a level of that. Like you have to know where these guys are valued.
Yeah, we'll try and get into that a bit more, because I feel like when I jumped into playing Devy, and I think a lot of people do, the value of players on the Devy side and the trading is one of the hardest things to grasp. Like, because obviously these guys haven't got into the league yet, so the values can be a bit thrown for some people. We'll try our best to like get into that, because it is a difficult area, But
Yes.
obviously, sticking to the draft, I mentioned there where like obviously I put myself in a hole in a quarterback position, in one league. When you after year one, so you go into year two and you've got your Devy drafts again, is it you've got your holes, like say like for instance I had a hole in quarterback. Is it dangerous to go and just identify, right, I've got problems at quarterback, so I have to draft a quarterback round 1, 2, 3? That's probably a gut reaction, which a lot of people would probably do, thinking I'm really short at quarterback, I need to go quarterback no matter what. But how important is it just to go best player available? Because like you said, you can still trade these guys. Just because you pick these guys doesn't mean they have to stay on your Devy team. So is it dangerous to like go and just look at the weaknesses on your dynasty team and just draft for that? Should you just be the best player available?
So that's a really tough question, because I think it can be dangerous depending on the position. So like quarterback, extremely dangerous, because I think the hit rates for the quarterback, so for example, in your example, let's say, you were struggling at that quarterback position, and then you're sitting there and you see Sam Howell available. And you're like, oh, of course, he's going to get drafted first round. And then now he goes in the 5th round, and then you didn't take one of these other guys, maybe these wide receivers, Garrett Wilson, someone like that, and you just lost all that value. And I do think that so when you're looking at your roster, obviously you need to address weaknesses, but like, again, like I trade for need. Like I'm not going to trade for, I know I have that position. I know my running back position is not great. But I will say this, the thing that's happening in dynasty leagues, and it happens in Devy because it's pretty much the same thing. It is now cheaper to just go get a 26-year-old running back in dynasty than to draft one. Like you can these guys, once they hit 25, no one wants these dudes anymore. And as a 34-year-old guy, that really makes me sad, because I am dead in dynasty terms. Like nobody wants you. So it's super cheap to go get, it's really cheap to go get those guys now. And so just do that, right? Like if you feel like your running back position's kind of, yeah, it's not there, but I'm a contender, or I'm in the middling pack, you can absolutely go grab something like a Joe Mixon right now is very cheap to go grab, where he could still put up a top 12 season this year in 2023. And so like, I like to do that, kind of manipulate, retool my roster that way. And then on the Devy side, I'll just take best player available. And you have to be very careful with best player available sometimes. Like, the running back position, is me and Christian Williams, who does the stuff with me for the Devy Royale. We were talking about this the other day, because we're just degenerates and we're on a Zoom after a show, and we were talking. The running back position is scary right now in Devy, because I don't think there's a lot of elite guys like we've seen. We've seen Bijan and Brees and these guys, and there's a lot more question marks that I think people want to like really kind of address. Like Travion, can he step up and not be injured? Nicholas Singleton, Judkins, like a lot of these guys that are considered the top guys, they're not Bijan level prospects. So if you expect them to be when you're drafting them and they're going to plug and play, they could be Zach Evans, day 3 guy that you're not going to have it. So take best player available. You should know your weaknesses, but the way I always look at these things is just trade for that need. Figure out where that value's at and go trade for it. And there's always this 28-year-old receiver. No one cares about Amari Cooper anymore, but he could have a top 5 year this year with Deshaun Watson. It's not out of the realm of possibility. So like, there's ways to kind of retool that you can do it on the cheap and still collect assets on the Devy side.
Yeah, like I say, the running back position's a good point in that, because like I say, a lot of people just want them shiny new toys, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
So, and you can like I say, easily get these older guys, and especially people off the waiver wire through the season as well. So it's probably definitely a position where you could probably here you've got your first round talent, in the Devy draft if you want to pick hold of them. But then after that, you can wait. Some people obviously choose not to, but you can wait later on and pick up guys in the waiver wire. There's so many injuries at the running back position, through the season in the NFL. The amount of people you see coming through, Mike Davis seems to be picking up a team every year and stuff and everything to get on. But it's another great point. And just the last point, which kind of moves into the second evaluation, and it's another one that's kind of struggled for me, playing Devy, is in the Devy drafts. Obviously, you've got the new freshmen. So this year, the 2023 freshmen, you've got people like Arch Manning coming in. But we haven't seen them play in college. So this kind of works from drafting to evaluation. Over here, I'll go on YouTube and I've always gone, I'll type in Arch Manning, but it's just all his best plays. So I'm just looking at his best plays. So you're not getting the proper evaluation of the player. What tips would you say, Kevin, that's to do this? Are you looking at where they're playing, their stats? So if a guy's playing in California or Texas, these big areas, where it's really competitive and they're putting up big numbers. Is that the best way to scout these guys, or is it still an area where it's people are trying to learn just as much as Devy, as it's going into the NFL, where it's they might be high 5-4-star guys, but still not definitely going to hit with them. So be careful where you're drafting them.
Yeah, I have some very simple terms for everybody out there, simple things that you can do. One big one is, be very weary of the big name quarterback like Arch. When you watched Arch play, you could tell he needed some development, and he definitely does. He's going to have to take that next step. But then consistently, he was getting drafted in the first round of Devy drafts at the beginning of the year. And then over time now, he just went in the fourth round of a draft I'm in now. So you be very weary of that. I will say this for just measurables, I'm very high on, this is why I was really high on JSN coming out 3 years ago, because he played in Texas 6A ball. Look for Texas 6A ball with wide receivers. And if they produce at that level, those guys are guys that kind of target. Okay, Jonte Cook. Oh, wow. You had almost 2,000 yards receiving in 6A ball, and Jonte Cook's going to Texas this year. Oh, okay. I'm going to keep my eye on you. So there are those areas. Arch, for example, he played in New Orleans, and he played at kind of a low-level talent high school, and then he'd go to the playoffs and just get killed in the playoffs because he's playing upper level talent now. So that is something to notice. And I think that's one of those things when you're in Dev, you got to know, okay, where are they playing? What is 6A ball? Where does that come from? As far as other stuff, running backs, if you're under 200 pounds, I really don't want you. If you're at 195, 190, maybe I'll take that shot. But a lot of these guys are 5-star kids at 180. I'm out. From a Devy perspective. If you're playing college, that's a whole nother thing. But from a Devy perspective, I'm looking at the weight for running backs, and then from my eyes and tape, and analytics guys will get mad at me. But when I'm watching tape in high school, knowing where these running backs play matters. So understanding kind of level of talent they're playing in, and it's hard to tell people what you see on tape, but that explosion on tape for running backs is really, really important, and their breakaway speed and just the little things. So if you're looking at a kid that's 210 that looks like he's a 4.5 kid at 210, and then you see Rayshawn Luke why can I not? Raleek Brown from USC. So 2 years ago, people really like Raleek. He's 175 pounds. Of course he's fast. He should be fast at that 4.4 speed. But then you look at some of these other guys Judkins, or even Nicholas Singleton. He's running a 4.4 at 215. And so those are the areas that you look for that running back position. And that's how I would definitely do that. And then look for schools. I'm a very elitist when it comes to, non-power 5 to power 5. Give me power 5 guy every time. I'm just an elitist that way. And these are little tricks you'll find as you're looking at that. Quarterbacks are the toughest though. So for me, I would say that's why I tend to stay away from freshman quarterbacks that are getting drafted way too high. If a Jackson Arnold's going to go in the 5th round, he's from Oklahoma this year, I'll take a shot on him in that range. But yeah, that's why I tend to avoid that. As far as the wide receivers go, look for where they produced, look for that explosive, and each class has its own narrative too. You're going to have different guys there, but don't reach on freshmen. But I will say the fun round right now is the 3rd round. So if you're going to get started in this, there's a lot of good talent in the third round. You get a lot of those freshman running backs that people don't know about. Justice Haynes from Alabama, some of these wide receivers, Jonte Cook, Mekhi Lemon, some of like the lower level freshmen that people aren't talking about as being the top guys. There's value to be had in that third round. And I will say third rounds always have a ton of talent for Devy.
So I've got a couple of follow-up questions from that, Kevin. Like you mentioned the group of five, you like to stay away from that. How do you feel with the new, like obviously the transfer portal over the years before, if you didn't know watching college, like normally if you transferred, you have to stay out for a year and then then you can play the following year after. Obviously it's changed now where you can transfer out, and there's so many more transfers now because you can play straight away. You know, if you're not starting at a team or you're like the third choice quarterback and you think you transfer out. So people like I'll use Jacob Cowan as an example. Obviously, in the group of five, you know, did really well. He's come over to Arizona, you know, like into the Power Five and done well as well. Is that how you look at it now? If you're going to evaluate that way, you want if they come over, right? I want to see them do really well in the Power Five, or you still like I'm not sold and stuff, or like you want him to come and blow away in the group of five in the Power Five as well.
So so the thing I would say is like the biggest miss that even Devy analysts make in the last few years is the group of five wide receiver going to the Power Five wide receiver, and they think that they can just take that next step up, and that is a tough one. You need to see them produce, and Cowing's one of my guys. Like when he was at the group of five, so I'm extremely biased on this. Like I like Cowing a lot. But again, like, and I get into this with like Jay Stein, who does the podcast with me every week for our Patreon, excuse me. He like fourth year wide receiver. He's got to hit these metrics now, right? And I wish he would have came out last year. Like that's how I look at Cowing now. Like, damn it, like I know analysts guys aren't going to like him, but he could be Zay Flowers. Like there's that level of like, all right, that's what makes the format fun. So everybody out there, like you get to kind of guess. But yeah, to your point, I stay away from group of five to Power Five, especially like, and the other thing with running backs, if a running back, I'll be honest, like we were not a big Sean Tucker group, like me and all the guys, like 2 years, even Kyron Williams too. But even last year, like Sean Tucker was a guy that we said, stay away, avoid Sean Tucker. And I think one area then, I think Jeff Bell made the good point on this when we were talking about it. With NIL, these guys can pretty much go wherever they want. And if you're that good at Syracuse, why isn't Alabama asking you to come play? Like, why aren't some of these big schools? Florida State kind of needed a running back last year. They have Trey Benson now, and they got Trey Benson. But like, there are guys that I'm like, it kind of raises flags in your head. Like, if you're so good, you're getting drafted in the first round of Devy drafts, but you're still playing at a smaller school when the NIL could possibly get you a lot of money, unless you're getting a lot of money from NIL. I think that brings in another level of something that you should kind of note when you're looking at these guys. But yeah, like non-Power Five running backs, I like Tyjae Spears, but I was never like comfortable drafting them because there's so many like Lou Nichols out there, and you got to be very careful with that. Like you have to be very careful with how you draft those guys and where that comes from.
It's like you mentioned Zay Flowers there. There's so many more elements to it, isn't there? Because like obviously you mentioned the NIL. I remember like when I first got into Devy, people were saying like you want like say wide receiver, or take wide receiver for instance. After the third year, you know, like being in there, if they can go into NFL, that's you kind of want to see that after the third year going into the thing. But like you see Chris Olave as well, there's another one where it's like staying in school for another year, is it more because of the NIL? So have you got to start taking that into account where it's like it's not maybe not because they're not talented, it's just some more money to be had there, you know, like before they go into the NFL. I know that obviously NFL is big money, but is this a new element that you've got to like where it's still a grey area where we still try to figure out what it is in Devy?
I think so. I think you have to, but I still think that if you're talented, like you like Blake Corum, that's a good example. Michigan running back. You know, well, he was one of the best. He's a really good college running back, but then he goes back, he gets injured, and he has the NIL opportunity. And you got to look at it like if he was probably getting day 2, grades, he probably would have left. He probably got day 3 grades and looked at his NIL money and he was like, I'm going to stay. Like I can just hang out here, get this money and stay here. So I think it does definitely play a role in that. Wide receiver is one of those positions where I think it matters a little less because you're like, oh, well, when you're looking at Zay and some of these other guys, they can still get drafted in the first or second round. And like Rashee Rice, like some of those guys, you still can do that. I think running backs really matter though. Like if you're not coming out your junior year, that third year, I think that's a big red flag for me in terms of production. And like, oh, okay, yeah, the NIL might be nice, but running back shelf life and what it is, they want to leave, they want to go there. So I think it's kind of position dependent too. When you're looking at that, but it's a whole nother piece of the puzzle. And that's what I think is exciting about it. But yeah, NIL matters less to me in terms of like wide receiver position in those places. Running back though, if you don't come out, I'm concerned with you. I'm gonna get a little bit nervous of like what was someone telling you about your draft grade.
Like you mentioned there, like obviously wide receivers and running backs coming out. Like obviously the quarterback position, you've got freshmen coming in, very less likely they're going to see much action in their freshman season. Like, but what about? Like I know I've mentioned, I've seen a few people mention that wide receiver year one. I think you and Christian and Jeff have mentioned it before, where like you see them tick certain boxes in that first year. Is it just the wide receiver position you want that, or do you want to see that in the running back as well? Because obviously, like I mentioned, the quarterback is a bit hard. You don't see many coming out and starting as freshmen. But another wide receiver. What about the running back? Do you want to? Do you want to see something in that first year as a freshman, or is it the same as wide receiver, or is it? Can you live with like maybe seeing something in the sophomore as a running back?
Yeah, so that's going to be like depth chart dependent a lot of the time with the running backs, like who's in front of them. So like always like Alabama running backs, right? Like who, there's so many of them there. Like, Jam Miller is a guy that we've kind of been touting is kind of like underrated right now. So Jam Miller was a freshman last year, really highly touted recruit. Did have like 200 yards rushing, so he did do something, but you're always looking for that next step there. So for the running backs, I don't necessarily just need to see a ton of production, and if you redshirt, that's fine. But there's also red flags like Kamar Wheaton, like, oh, I'm transferring. Like that is like, oh, okay, well, that there's something going on there. Wide receiver, you do want to see some because I think with the way the the college football offenses are and the depth chart and the schemes, if you're a talented freshman wide receiver, you're gonna get on the field somehow. Like Marvin Harrison Jr. notwithstanding, because that was Ohio State. So again, you got to look at like the rooms. If you're looking at the wide receiver room, like a depth chart, and a 4 or 5 star kid goes to Cal and doesn't play his first year, I'm a little nervous. Like I would be a little nervous about that. But if you go to Texas, oh, I get it. Like I like Jonte Cook going to Texas this year, but that room is loaded. They have a lot of guys. Isaiah Neyor, Xavier Worthy, Donnie Mitchell. Like they got some dudes there, Jordan Whittington. So if he doesn't necessarily get 400 or 500 yards, okay, well then I get it. I understand. I'm still going to believe in his talent. So it really is kind of depth chart dependent who is there and why couldn't they take that next step there. You like to see him produce something at the wide receiver position. But from the running back spot, I'm less concerned if I have them rated in my top 5. If they're in my top 5 and, they're going to Georgia's, Alabama's, those places, Michigan, some of those other places that produce these high level running backs, then I'm less concerned about that. But if you're going to like Florida A&M, baby, and you're not getting any usage or volumes, then I'm worried.
Yeah, that's definitely some great points there. Obviously, the big teams, obviously, it's going to be harder to like pave your way in. When there's already like bigger guys there and stuff that have been there a couple of years that are waiting for their chances. So yeah, there's some good points there. Some good points to take on for new people because obviously it's a tough area to see. Like when you see you see someone that's a 5-star, you just presume, oh, they're going to be good. Like our 4-star guy, they might not have played in the freshman season, but this is the 5-star. They're still going to be good. So it's great points to there, Kevin. So before we get on to a few questions after, this was the tough one that I mentioned earlier at the top, the trading and the value. So we'll try and get stuck into this the best we can and explain it the best to especially new people in Devy. So trading and value, Kevin, and that's a good point that you said earlier on with stuff, where you can, if you're going to do tiers, maybe try and put them in to where you can. But how difficult is it to do that? I know you mentioned it's something you're really proud of, over there. Because obviously, we'll start with someone that's a well-known for the 2024, Caleb Williams. How do you do it? As in, like the best? I know I've probably put you on the spot here to try and you might want to go deeper into it. So, how can you say that Caleb Williams is like quarterback 10? How do you put into? Are you just thinking the evaluation of like this guy is a blue chip quarterback who with the rushing side, the talent that he brings throwing. If he brings that to the NFL, obviously he can be a top 10 quarterback, because we've seen other quarterbacks with that ability do that? Is that how it's done, or is it much more concept than that?
It can be. So this is the most challenging part, and there's different ways you can look at it. So I can explain kind of what my reasoning is here is like, so I have Caleb Williams at 9. So if we're going to use Caleb Williams as an example, what that's based on is a previous precedent of the quarterback position. So when a guy gets drafted at the 101 in a super flex draft, or if you're looking at the 101 in the NFL draft, like Bryce Young, he's going to be a top 14 quarterback asset right away. So like I have Bryce as 14. So I have him right there at QB 14. When then you add on Caleb Williams' kind of rushing ability and the level of prospect that he is, and, doesn't have the size concerns and all that stuff, that bumps him up for me. So, the worst and best answer to this question is like, it's all a guess, but it's an educated guess. So, and you have to use based on your experience in the format, where do you think these guys are going to pop in? And then you also have to take into play of like dynasty values change so much, but like, so for the running back position, a lot of guys are getting old. Like you have a lot of older running backs, Derrick Henry, Zeke kind of falling off the market, Saquon Barkley, even CMC is in that, Eckler, Jacobs, Chubb. So when you think of it that way, you're looking at that running back, the dynasty running back position, and then you're thinking of a guy like Singleton or Travion Henderson, these guys that are coming soon, or Quinshon Judkins. You have to look at it from like, all right, if they get drafted in the first or second round, because of the age of the dynasty running backs, where would they be ranked? So that's how I kind of do it. I look at it and then I put them in my rankings. Hey, this is where they would be if they got ranked today, drafted here based on what those dynasty ages are. And then you use that as trade. Okay, so this is where I would value him. I value Travion as my running back 10. Here are the guys around that I'm willing to trade. And I think one thing I've picked up too, if you have tiers, I am willing to pretty much move anybody in the tier that I have, like in the same tier, if I get added like a pick with it, right? So if I get like a round 2 rookie pick and I'm sitting there like, so for example, in my quarterback tiers, I have Fields, Lawrence, and Lamar Jackson. If I have Justin Fields and someone offers me Lamar Jackson in a second, I'll probably take Lamar Jackson because he's in the same tier as mine. And so I'm okay with that. So that's another way to look at it. Like if you have these tiers banked into it, that is kind of how you do it. And in understanding like what you should trade for and what you shouldn't trade for. So like I question, like I struggle with guys that trade like for Devy running backs on a rebuild. That's not necessarily the best way to do it. You shouldn't be trading for running backs anyway, but when you're trading for Devy running backs, it's too much insulated risk on that. So that's how I kind of look at it there. I've been, Jay Stein is super smart. He works for us over the Devy Royale and Football Guys, and he does it a little differently. So what he tries to do, and he does analytics, and I don't trust him, but you can trust him if you want to. But so he does analytics, and what he does is he actually builds into his model player comps based on all the analytics, and it's really good. It's really smart. And so like if Caleb is comp to Kyler Murray, that's what he would value him at. So like, oh, a top 5 maybe dynasty asset in fantasy. And then he can comp them based on what he does, based on what he thinks their expected ceiling and floor is based on who he comps them to in the NFL. That's another more complicated way to do it. If you have that ability to do that, it's great. But for me, I just look at like the landscape and how would I value these guys. Like the wide receiver position, super tough right now because there's so many damn wide receivers. There's just my bad, my mic came out. But no, I would say like, and that's the hard part, is trying to figure out like from a wide receiver position. There's so many wide receiver too. So what the hell do you put like Xavier Worthy, who goes to Texas, who we think is wide receiver the 24th class? How do you value him? And so, for me, it's always expectations of what I want my dynasty team to look like. If I can move Xavier Worthy for like a DJ Moore plus, I'd probably do that based on my tiers and where they're at. But just having some type of visual aid to help you and plug them in. And I will say this, like when I did my rankings update that it's available on the Patreon, that took me, I'm still not comfortable with it ever. But like initially like 8 hours to do a position. Like, okay, where am I really putting these guys and where am I valuing these guys based on this? And it's really, really difficult. And so that's just something to kind of know too.
Yeah, some great points there. With valuing. Just throw one thing back, like as an example, like maybe to like people who are watching, like because obviously people will say, "Oh yeah, I've got my rankings and stuff." Say I've got, for argument's sake, say Caleb Williams you've got as 10 and you've got Justin Fields as 9. I know people might not have that, but we'll just use that as an argument anyway and stuff. Say that like someone wants to trade Caleb Williams for Justin Fields, and the guy with Justin Fields goes, "Well, hang on a minute, yeah." that's fine. But Caleb Williams isn't in the league yet, so there's all this things where, yeah, touch wood for us. We want Caleb Williams in the league, and it's maybe unlikely
Yeah.
anything can happen to him. But obviously, he's not in the league yet. Is that determined into your rankings as well, or have you just got to put that to the side as in thinking, well, this is what would happen, where he would be ranked if he gets into the league?
Yeah, you have to. So that's where it comes down to knowing your league mates is really important. And so understanding kind of like what they, like, for example, I have a lot of guys in my leagues that I know are like, they chase the young guys. They love that unknown. And so, like, you could probably do that deal, right? Where if you have like an older guy like me, where I'm like, yeah, I'm not trading Justin Fields for Caleb Williams. Like, I'm just not doing it because that's a lateral move and a lot of risk there. So, like, to me, you have to look at that. And that really just comes down to knowing your league mates. Like, what are their tendencies? And one thing I would say to do, and it's something that I do in all my leagues, but especially in Devy, is I chart the trades that my league mates make. So what I do is I put a spreadsheet, and I know, because, and again, we're all nerds, but like, so I have a spreadsheet here, and like, Devy League 1, all right, this guy made this trade last year for this quarterback. So then I'll just put in there little notes like, oh, okay, likes Devy quarterbacks or values this. And so over time, if your league stays together and your league mates stay in there, you can kind of get a general feeling of where their values lie and what they like and what they don't like. And then you can use that against them. That's the whole point. You're trying to beat them and understand, like, hey, this guy really likes youthful quarterbacks. I have Caleb Williams, but I can win now if I have an NFL side. Like, if I can go get a top 7 guy and I feel like Justin Fields, that guy is going to take that next step, I can probably make this deal. And then that's when you start that negotiation. So it really comes down to kind of psychology of your league mates, where it's at, especially in Devy, because, there is that little like added piece of, all right, how do these guys value these guys? Because values all over across the board. What I laugh the most at in Devy is when people say there's consensus rankings. That is so crap. There's no such thing as consensus rankings in Devy, because you, Jordan, might like, this player much higher than I. Like, I got yelled at apparently on a podcast because I don't like Roman Himby from Maryland. Shit, I don't know. Okay, like, you might like Roman Himby. I don't like necessarily think he could be a Devy asset, but that's what's hard about the format too, is because, we all have this, like, think about it this way. Like, my favorite thing to do in like startups and dynasty is to draft without ADP. Just get rid of the option, draft, go. And then you'll see how different drafts go, because a lot of us build into that. So, there's not that many Devy areas out there where they have rankings, especially for free. There's really not that many. So, you have Ray, you have us in terms of Devy, and you have like the C2C guys, and you have some of those guys out there, the dashboard and with Brandon, Devy Marketplace, those guys. But that's really where the consensus rankings from. But I'll let you guys in on a little secret. We don't know shit. Like, we're trying to do our best here, but it is extremely hard to do. So that's also the hard part about trading and figuring out where it's at, because so many guys pull from other places. And so it's funny how this works. If one community really likes, like, if Ray's community really likes a Devy player higher than our community, those trades aren't going to happen. Like, it's just not going to work. And and then knowing where they get their information from is probably the most important thing too. Like, know who they're signed up for, know what Patreon they're in, know if they're in a Patreon, and know what those guys like. And that is another deeper way to kind of manipulate your league mates too.
You can do that as well by, like, obviously make sure you listen to as many podcasts as you can, because only if someone starts speaking about a player, especially on the dynasty side, then you see the next couple of days someone picks giveaway and stuff like it. But I think it's a great point that you make. Like, I play around with spreadsheets. I've got like a spreadsheet with just all my fantasy teams. Just sometimes I make spreadsheets for the sake of spreadsheets, because, like you said, we're just all nerds when it comes to fantasy. So it's great to like put little comments like that in there, like, and go back and track, like, because you really get the upper hand on your leagues and stuff with, if you know what, especially like this guy's an LSU fan, so I can maybe get a little bit more from elite neighbors because this guy's an LSU fan. Like, things like that can help you like win leagues and stuff, which is good. So the last question is kind of like, I don't think it's like well, we'll find out. I don't think it's a big answer, but it's one that, like, when I first started playing, and I know a few people have come to me and asked about it, and it's still, I'm probably not that's why I got you on, Kevin, to answer questions like this. Spencer Rattler, obviously a few years ago, he was tipped to be the Heisman, #1 overall pick. A lot of people picked him at 101, 102 in Devy drafts. Obviously left Oklahoma to go to South Carolina, obviously after some bad seasons. What's the best thing to do with these Devy picks? Is it do you know when the value's gone down so much, is it best just to stick with them and see if the value goes up, and or can you trade, or is it just about getting, if you can get some good value for him, maybe trade off him, or if it's not what you want, maybe just stick with him and see if anything comes of it? You know, is there a right answer here to do, or is it just play the field and see what happens in your leagues?
There's always a right answer here. I think it's just like Dynasty. It's the same way. Ebbs and flows, understanding where the market is, where the value's at. You know, hopefully you have a Gamecock fan in your Devy league that loves Spencer Rattler. That's always a help. I will say this, though, and to that point, like, it is a joke, but you know, if you're in a Devy league, you're going to have a lot of college football fans in those Devy leagues. Like it's just like NFL, we're all NFL fans. But you see it in the NFL side. If you're a Green Bay Packer fan, those dudes are drafting Jordan Love as QB18 in Dynasty right now. Like they are. They're out there just rolling. And so you will find that in Devy as well. Like you'll get some Devy guys that really believe in the guys and their talent because they're college fans. And college fans are a little bit more fanatics than NFL fans. Like they're a little crazy. So there is ways to kind of do that. Like in there, I will say, like, you will miss the boat though on some guys. Like you're never getting back DJU, right? Like DJU. Now you draft him at the 101, you're never getting that kind of value back. But there were some guys that did believe in him last year, like in the middle of the year, to where, oh, he'll bounce back and he'll have that you might be able to shift off. But it's one of those things where it's about cutting losses, like just trying to extract any type of value, because I think that is the biggest question mark. But you can mitigate those risks. Don't draft quarterbacks like Spencer Rattler at the 101, right? Take Marvin Harrison Jr., those guys. Like have a list of do not draft until this area and where that is. Like a good example of that is the 25 class for quarterbacks right now. There's no consensus quarterback one in that class. There's a guy, Drew Aller from Penn State, who I don't mind taking a shot on in the second. But after that, you're gonna take some risks there. So mitigate your mistakes. But if you take a guy like Spencer, yeah, if he has a big year, there are guys that believe in him though, because I posted about him and people are like, "Oh, this is his year. He's coming to bounce back." So like, there's ways to do it. Understanding when to get out, when to see that market shifts and get ahead of it, and just go through it. Like, and there's always there's a weird Devy period where you can make a lot of trades, and it's from January to the Senior Bowl. So you're going to get these weird spots. So it's different than Dynasty. So Devy, what you'll find is people believe in some guys once they start checking back in to kind of like the rookies coming and stuff like that in January and February, especially, they'll check back in and you can move some of these guys. There's ways that you can kind of like, you know, Kyron Williams was running back one for a couple weeks there in February where you can kind of get off of them there. And then they have a good Senior Bowl and you're talking like, oh my gosh, they're going to bounce back. And there's ways to do it. You just have to hit those windows, and those windows are super important.
Yeah, I think, like you said, you know, that like it's very similar to Dynasty. You know, like just like, and you're not going to get it right all the time, but just try and like get it. If you're not believing that guy, hopefully someone is still a believer. I know, like you said, I know there's people out there that still cling. We're stubborn people, fantasy players, and we like, if we've got a guy and stuff, we like to cling on to him, thinking, oh yes, it's okay. That I believe in him, even the year 3 and stuff. I believe in him still. He can come back.
Yep.
So yeah. So it's, if you've got some of them guys in your league, there's obviously you can probably get a bit of value back. But yeah, great advice there. So just before we go, we've got a few questions here, you know, that came in. You know, the first one is like, when you know, you mentioned very early on in the episode where obviously Devy is great. You know, you've got Devy assets on the side, but at the end of the day, you're trying to win your league. You know, with the NFL guys. So you mentioned the strategies where it's like, don't be scared to trade your Devy pick. So it's like, what's the best strategies you can use to help you win the league now? Is it trading those Devy picks? Don't be scared to maybe go into the Devy draft with a lot less picks than other people to get those veterans in the NFL. Is that probably the best advice to try and win your league?
Yeah, I mean, I would look at Devy as just try to win your league like in a fantasy league in Dynasty. Like go after it, just stick it there. And if you want to collect more assets, yeah, you trade your Devy picks. Like I have a couple guys who have won a couple of my leagues the last few years where they have no Devy picks. They literally trade them all and you know how you re-up on MFL or Sleeper and it's like, who wants my picks as soon as we re-up? And like they will do that. And that is the easiest way to do it. And I also think too, in Dynasty, you have ageist where they don't like these older prospects. Devy, it's kind of even more like that because they're so involved in that Devy thing that you can get a lot of these guys for really, really good value. And if you combine your rookie draft or your Devy and Dynasty draft, even then you're getting incredible value because, like we talked about, people will reach on these Devy quarterbacks instead of drafting like Saquon Barkley. It's like, okay, well, I'll take Saquon and just ride out 2 years. And so there's value to be had there. So, yeah. And I also think, I'm a big believer in not rebuilding, but retooling. So there's ways to not have to rebuild ever. Like just retool a little bit. Go after some of those veteran guys that people don't want anymore for your 4th round Devy pick. Okay, I'll take that. A good guy to target is like Eckler. Eckler is going to, fall off at some point. That's what people keep saying. And, you could probably get him for a 2nd round Devy pick, maybe depending on the league makeup and where the team is at. Maybe there's a guy that falls that somebody really likes. So yeah, just go after it, trade your picks and go target some of those veterans and do that. That's the best way to do it, in my opinion, and build through the wide receiver position, having those wide receivers and quarterbacks in set that makes it less risk from the running back side. And you can always trade like a wide receiver 4 for probably a running back 2, like with upside, that wide receiver 4 that everybody like George Pickens right now. Everybody loves George Pickens. You could probably move Pickens for a running back that can give you value in the middle of your league, and you're going to go try to win it. So like there's little nuances to it.
It kind of leads on to my next point there. Obviously, you've got the NFL, the NFL, the draft, your dynasty draft, sorry. Then you've got your Devy, and then every year after that, you've got a depleted rookie draft where there's normally some good rookie players that come through, like on there. And a lot of people like kind of turn their nose up at this and going, they're just people that you pick up late on and stuff. But obviously, in a lot of now you've got Jalen Hyatt and things like that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you're a believer in Jalen Hyatt, but like Tajay Spears, you've got some people in there. Do you think it's a good thing to like maybe try and don't be scared to like keep hold of these like picks and maybe pick up a few more, because these are guys that have been picked up by NFL teams, like in obviously some in round 2, some round 3, 4, where especially running backs, especially where the amount of running backs that go down and and the next man up is like people that are normally from these depleted rookie teams. So is that a good tactic to do? Maybe look at the running backs in these positions and don't be scared to like draft in these, because these, like I said, these players that have been picked up by NFL teams in the draft.
Yeah. So, there's always value to be had in these things. The way I get this question a lot of like, how do I value a Devy depleted pick? And what I tell them is it's different depending on, how deep it is. So, but let's say it's a normal, I don't know, 5 round Devy draft. There's still value to be had there. And what I try to tell them is, so early first in like Devy depleted to me are like mid first. So I try to go back basically like, okay, if you're going to trade for a Devy depleted first and you kind of think it's going to be like the 108, to me, that's like the 201 in regular drafts. Cause there's, like you said, there is value. There's guys that fall through the cracks there. So that's how I kind of look at it. Like Javonte Williams is going at like the 107 in a lot of drafts when he first came out in the rookie drafts, depending on where you league you're in. And he's going to go at the 101 in Devy depleted drafts that year. That's kind of how I would look at it from that perspective. There is value to be had. But also, if you're new to Devy, be very careful, because there are some people who know you're new to Devy and you'll think those first have equal value to regular first in Dynasty. And then that's where you get screwed in your trade. So just know that like I would make everything by like a half a round or middle of the round backwards. Those late round picks, yeah, if it's a depleted rookie draft with just rookies, then definitely like I will always try to target like backup quarterbacks and stuff like that in Superflex. Like I have a shit ton of Clayton Tune for some reason, but that's going to work out well for me because Clayton Tune might start early. So like that's how I kind of go after those, but there's always value to be had in those picks, because we're degenerates and we always think we're smarter than everybody else. And everybody always thinks that guy that they pick in that 3rd round is going to be the breakout. You're just going to have to get him in the 2nd round now or late first, and there's still value. Like, and you can still kind of move him there. I've seen a lot of like moves where they have these late first and depleted rookies, and they'll trade it for like a Devy 5th round, which I actually don't hate, like, because then you could take a shot at a Devy player that maybe you have a breakout or something like that. So there's always ways to maneuver. So don't turn your nose up at them. Just understand what the value is and where their true value lies, so then you can use them.
And finally, obviously, we mentioned there's so many different types of Devy leagues, and then obviously with Devy drafts, you've got like, I think you mentioned in your video that you've got 1 round Devy drafts each year, 4 round ones. But there's some people that are crazy enough to do 10 round Devy drafts every year. Is there any advice? When you get into the like maybe 8, 9, 10 round guys where you're looking? maybe like a lot of the especially the freshmen have gone, especially if it's a league that's been going a few years. A lot of the freshmen have gone. Should you be targeting like the, say for instance, on if whatever you use, like 247, like all that stuff? I'm not saying you should be doing that, like, but like if you are like stuck for, maybe you don't have enough time to like look into like what players are available, should you be really targeting these late people, or is there a better way to go about it, than looking at, like, say for instance, Austin Mack? And I know a lot of Aiden Charles is a massive one for targeting late for Oregon State. There's a lot of
Yeah.
hype behind him and stuff. Is there a better way to do it than just like looking at players like that, like through this? Or is this, should you be looking at people who've already put production in, that have slipped through the cracks?
Yeah, I think, when you're going late and you're trying to find them, don't reach on like second or third year running backs that have had opportunity that doesn't necessarily haven't produced yet. Like, I think there's question to be had there. So like, for example, like Frank Gore Jr. So I just pulled up a draft while you were talking. I'm in a 10-round Devy draft right now because I just have no life, and that's just my life. So like Frank Gore Jr. just went into the 9th round. Frank Gore Jr. I love Frank Gore, but Frank Gore Jr. I think he had like 3 games last year where he popped off, but consistently I don't see him being like a Devy asset. That's to me a wasted pick. Like I don't feel comfortable with that area. Where I took Dante Thornton from Tennessee. He, Oregon kid, has a chance maybe to break out in Tennessee's offense. We just saw Cedric Tillman get drafted, Jalen Hyatt. We know production's going to be there. If Dante Thornton can get on the field, which was his biggest issue at Oregon, they just didn't use him in the right way, he might be able to kind of break out, right? And so, like, to me, I look for those opportunities where they're at. This is also not a bad time for maybe those tight ends. I hate taking Devy tight ends early, but a guy like Bryson Nesbitt from North Carolina, he could be tight end 2 next year of the 24 class. Like, that's his value. So there's ways to kind of do that. And then there's always like the 20, the running back class, the freshman class. There's always guys like a Judkins out there, a 3-star kid that doesn't necessarily like hit on people's radars early, but then has an opportunity. So what I do is I go through and I look at my 3-star kids. And like I told you guys, the running back position, 5'10", 215. All right, who's 5'10", 215 at a Power 5 conference that may be getting overlooked? And in this draft, I took Benjamin Hall from Michigan. Now, I'm a noted Michigan fan, so this is definitely a biased pick. But I like Hall. I think that he has value. And, his senior year, he got suspended kind of from the team. Or something happened out the field. Whatever. So he didn't get up there in stars, but he was one of the best spring game guys they have. In Michigan, they produce running backs. So that's kind of how I look at it too. So there's definitely ways to do it. Quarterbacks too, like Jaden Rashada, going to Arizona State. There's guys like that you can definitely take a shot on. So those are just some tips. I think the biggest thing for me is, like, I always try to tell people what to avoid. Avoid Southern Miss running backs in the 9th or 10th round, right? Or, Caleb Johnson from Iowa. I like Caleb Johnson, but when's the last time Iowa had a running back that was relevant in the NFL? So, like, I think running backs late are kind of a mistake. There's always Javantes out there, but for every Javante, there's so many other guys that we just don't hear of anymore. But if you can target some of those freshman running backs that maybe aren't as high on people's list, that's kind of the area to go.
That's brilliant, that, Kevin. I appreciate that. Like I say, that's the end of the episode, and like hopefully we've mostly Kevin has given you some great advice there. Especially if you're starting off, just little tips. Especially evaluating. If you want to get into evaluating, like for the Devy side and drafting, like and all that. Hopefully, we've helped you out there. And like I mentioned at the top, make sure you follow Kevin at @DuBois_22 on Twitter. So he put some great articles out there. He's like obviously got the podcast there with some. Make sure you subscribe to that. The Devy Royale with Kevin, Christian, and Jeff. Great podcast. It's kind of like with the football guys where they talk about college as well, but it's still Devy as well, which is great. And they'll give you some great advice if you subscribe to them and keep watching the videos on there. Kevin, thank you for dropping by. I really appreciate you jumping on and talking some Devy with us.
Yeah, of course, man. Yeah, and if you guys have any questions at all, just come reach out. DM me on Twitter if you're on social media. And I'm here to help you guys. We have a Patreon that can help really well, but just go to our YouTube channel. We put a lot of free crap up there. Again, this isn't for making money. This is just to, introduce you guys to a fun kind of format that I think can be fun for you.
Yeah, definitely, and make sure that maybe that can be a thing to do this year. Maybe just jump into a Devy league and try it out. try it out this year. I'm sure Kevin will agree. You won't be disappointed. It would be a fun experience for you. Kevin, like I said, thank you very much for jumping by. I really appreciate it. And obviously, I'll drop all the places they can follow you at the bottom of the video here. Like I said, but really appreciate you jumping on. It's been a fun chat. It's flown this hour, so yeah, appreciate it.
Appreciate it, man.
Thank you.